going to, which way he's going to tip the balance. So Manchin's going to be incredibly powerful and will kind of speak uh, for this small group of Democrats and Republicans that have emerged in the middle. It's the usual suspects: Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Joe Manchin, and they're going to be power brokers as we go forward.
Karin, it is astounding to see this ceremony here at a building that was attacked just 2 weeks ago by Americans, no less, by American citizens, not by a foreign power. As someone who spent a lot of time there, what's going through your mind right now as you watch this, literal transition over the last couple of weeks? We've been seeing teams have to repair the Capitol over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a sobering inauguration in general. It's not going to be quite the levity of celebration that it usually is. Biden's going to walk through doors that are still having smashed glass, which is a reminder of what happened just 2 weeks ago. You see, the mall is covered with flags, not human beings, because we're still in the middle of the worst throes of pandemic. So there's a lot a lot of weight hanging over this inauguration, which frankly the Biden team has made a point of highlighting because it's a fairly serious moment in the country's state. Regardless of whether or not there's a changeover in the presidency, things are fairly difficult right now, given what the Capitol just went through 2 weeks ago and what the country's been going through for most of the last year. And so I think those two elements are, going to be silent partners in this inauguration, are going to be featured very heavily as part of the stagecraft of all of this, because it's a reflection of what's really going on in the country. So as dressed up as the Capitol is, as much as we're seeing all the lovely bunting and the ceremony that's going to happen, it's against the backdrop of a Capitol that was ransacked. You see evidence of that in that door that he walks through to come out to that balcony, and a crowd that isn't there because everybody's social distancing at home still, as the numbers of deaths from the coronavirus pandemic keep ticking up and up.
Just remarkable. We saw their leader Mitch McConnell arrive, as well as his wife, a former secretary in the Trump cabinet. James Homan, a lot of eyes are on Republicans today by their own making, because in their resistance to acknowledge the legitimacy of this election and in their squabbling in the last couple of weeks and the fallout of the riot at the Capitol, everyone's wondering how Republicans will comport themselves today and beyond.
Yeah, Libby, and a spokesman for Paul Ryan just confirmed to me that he's there, and said that he thought it was really important that you show Republicans celebrating the transfer of power, and obviously George W. Bush has come and put out a strongly worded statement a few weeks ago, but a lot of attention is on the current Republicans. It's been interesting, Mitch McConnell gave that speech yesterday where he blamed Trump for provoking the rioters. But what I was struck by were how many Republicans yesterday sort of signaled resistance to convicting Trump, which is obviously going to be something that's going to be important in the next couple of weeks. And the excuse they're using, Libby, isn't to defend what Trump did. It's instead to say it's not constitutional to impeach a president after he's left office. And so I think that is a reflection of how a lot of Republicans, people like Joni Ernst from Iowa, are going to try to thread the needle. And it will be fascinating to watch today on stage who applauds at what. Obviously, it's going to be an awkward dynamic up there. It's not going to be packed closely together the way it was in 2017. But I think it will sort of be interesting to see how many Republicans are applauding, and whether they are kind of bought into the moment, the pageantry of our American story.
Let's go now to Lee Powell, who is there on the west front of the Capitol. So Lee, as we count down to the inauguration, give us some perspective on how remarkable this moment is in American history.
Well, Libby, hello again from the west front of the U.S. Capitol. The Marine Band has taken its place and is moving through its program. So they may come up any time when I'm on camera. And so that's the music that you will be hearing in the background. But yeah, when you talk to people who study inaugurations and you talk about this year, you think of big words like extraordinary, different, unusual, mainly because the former president, current president Donald Trump, is not here. He's on his way back to Florida on Air Force One. For someone who wrote the book on inaugurations, that's a bad thing. But for a history professor who studies inaugurations and transitions, the fact that Trump isn't here may not be so bad after all. Take a look.
The high stakes, the threats of violence against the Capitol, given the way he has been able to incite his followers to riot and to violence, it seems to me that it will cool the temperatures in the Capitol and will take away some of the potential conflict that would be on stage between a President Trump and a President Biden at the same time.
I know that a lot of Trump supporters are glad that Trump isn't attending. I know that a lot of Biden supporters are glad that Trump is not attending. Well, I don't feel that way. I think it's very sad. I think it's not a good look for democracy. I think it's always a great look for democracy when the old and the new are together. So I'll be saddened that that won't take place this year.
Democracy is stronger when the old and the new are together. But Professor Balcerski, who you heard from first in that tape, does have an interesting point, and I want to get these facts right. He says if you look at the presidents who came after those who didn't show up, so we're talking about those 3 presidents who did not attend their successors' inauguration. Thomas Jefferson after John Adams in 1801, Andrew Jackson after John Quincy Adams in 1829, and Ulysses S. Grant after Andrew Johnson in 1869. Libby, Professor Balcerski, the history professor, has an interesting point. He says if you look at all of those presidencies, those who followed the presidents who did not show up at their successors' inauguration, they were all pretty substantial presidencies that went down in the history books as fairly successful, if not very successful, just in terms of what they were able to accomplish and their place in history. So, we don't have any indication this early what Joe Biden's presidency will look like, but if you look to the past, certainly those 3 historical cases do present a good point for those presidents who went on to serve and had pretty substantial presidencies compared to the folks that they replaced who didn't show up at their inaugurations. Libby, back to you.
Thanks so much, Lee Powell. And you can see there Senator Mike Lee. I also saw Congressman Jim Jordan a few moments ago. Karin, Jim Jordan is someone who has tried to delegitimize the presidency of Joe Biden. Is it important that he's here today, or is this just sort of, back to normal protocol, business as expected?
It is, well, it's symbolic that he's there. I mean, I think it would have been far more significant had he simply not shown up. That would have been a gesture of this solidarity with the president, even when he was denying the facts of the election, continuing unabated into the post-Trump era. So the fact that he's there is what he's supposed to be doing. It's going to be interesting to see whether he follows that up with a change of tone, a change of heart. As you saw, Jordan was Trump's main defender on the floor of the House as they were moving towards impeachment, and did impeach the president already last week. We'll see what Jordan keeps saying in public in defense of the president, or if he kind of tries to fall back into a general form of line. But look, he is clearly one of the leaders and voices of the GOP at this point. That is well established after the last week.
James, we just saw Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who successfully saw a friend and associate of his get pardoned by Donald Trump overnight.
Yeah, and Menendez also didn't get convicted in that case. It ended up being a mistrial. It is a funny situation. I think Bob Menendez does not want us talking about Solomon Melgen, who was convicted of defrauding Medicare by $86 million and was a very, very close friend of the New Jersey senator.
And received a pardon in Donald Trump's slew of pardons that came out overnight. You can see there just that National Mall, it's a stunning image, Rhonda Colvin. The daunting task of making this a celebratory moment in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, sort of the lockdown situation here in Washington, D.C. And the transition team has decorated the lawn of America, really, in a way that makes it look full and busy and patriotic, not just empty, Rhonda.
That's right. The National Mall today would likely be packed. It usually has some visitors, although Some presidents have had different numbers in the crowds that come to the National Mall for their inauguration, but there usually are tourists who want to be a part of this. And it's really sometimes seen as a bipartisan day where the whole city is alive with people who just want to be a part of some pageantry that we don't often get in America. This is one of the few times where we do get this sort of ritual and tradition for our country. So it's quite a scene to see those flags there. It's a reminder of the security measures that are here because of the January 6th insurrection. It's also a reminder about COVID. The National Mall was the place yesterday where President to come soon, Biden and his wife and Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband were there to memorialize the victims of COVID-19. So it's a place right now where it's still, but that stillness sort of matches the moment we're living in. We're living in some very times of a lot of crisis, multiple crises that the Biden campaign has to take on day one, today, right after they're sworn in. So the fact that the National Mall, usually a gathering place, is so still, just really underscores the moment that we're in.
Saw Ted Cruz there taking a selfie a moment ago, taking his mask off. You can leave your mask on for a selfie. Captures the moment in history. Karin, I've been noticing that some people even have double masks on, not just one mask, but double masks on for protection.
I'm one of those people who wears a double mask in the Capitol now. There have been too many lawmakers that have contracted COVID.
And we're seeing
it is a space where you can open windows easily. And I think that a day like today, when there's a lot of people around, that people are just taking extra precautions.
Sorry, Karin, to almost cut you off there. I was just noticing that there are all the congressional leaders that were gathered there. There's Senator Bernie Sanders. And Karin, I saw Senator Amy Klobuchar a few moments ago. These are people who competed against Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination. And of course they're here. Of course they're present on this day. What is this moment like for others in the Democratic Party who perhaps did not see their candidate win or did not themselves win, but are still now facing Democrats controlling the White House, controlling the House, and sort of barely controlling the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been a moment of the Democratic Party and the Democratic primary field fell in line behind Biden pretty much with quite closing of the ranks, and they have been willing to play those support roles for his campaign as he went through the general election. That's clearly not changing. I'm sure some of those people, when they started out campaigning, clearly had hopes of being president. Even once those were dashed, maybe had hopes of serving in his cabinet. Most of them are not. Most of them will remain where they were. And those who came out of the Senate are still going to be in the Senate. So we see them as, again, cheering on their leader today. And you've seen in the last few weeks, especially, incredible solidarity among members of the Democratic Party, especially in the wake of the riot, especially as in these waning weeks of Trump going and not going willingly or gracefully from the Oval Office. The question really is going to be, do they keep that cohesion going for the next several months down the line? I'm sure we'll see it for the next several days, the first few days of the new administration, the first few weeks. But there are ideological differences within the Democratic Party, and the spectrum of people that ran against Biden in the primary do represent and reflect a wider spectrum of the Democratic Party than Biden and his team do. And that is going to be an interesting mix. It's going to pose some challenges when Biden tries to work with the Hill. It's going to possibly promote some public criticism and open debate about where the party stands. And there will be people on the Hill that want to pull more leftward than the Biden administration is currently constituted. Seems like they will naturally go. So that is in the future, that is probably coming. But for today, they are all sitting on that balcony, all sitting on that dais, and staying in line behind the president-elect for just a little bit more than an hour and a half. We'll be calling him the president fairly soon, as they have been doing for the last several months of the campaign.
The Biden motorcade is making its way to the Capitol, where Joseph R. Biden will take the oath of office at noon today. Well, just 2 weeks ago, the Capitol, of course, was the scene of a riot that left Washington and the nation reeling. Let's go back and check in now with my colleague, Nicole Ellis. Nicole, you've been talking to some of the women lawmakers of color who were inside the Capitol when it was stormed. What have they told you about their experience?
That's right, Libby. I have been speaking with women of color lawmakers. Specifically, I spoke with Congresswoman Grace Meng from New York. She was actually in a room between the House and the Senate. And you can actually see that room in some of the videos that you see as people sort of pass through during that insurrection. And she barricaded the door. She's one of the few that had a television with her, so she saw what was happening and she learned of the danger that she was in and saw the room that she was in. Literally as things were unfolding and hearing people outside of that room. And she said her biggest fear was that, you know, if someone were to open that door, even though she barricaded it, her biggest fear was as a Chinese American woman, what would happen to her, and truly felt uniquely vulnerable in this time of coronavirus. And as you heard President Trump call it the China virus earlier today, using a slur to refer to the virus. As you can see, the parade is at least beginning to prepare to start at some point soon. But I hope you can still hear me. But honestly, several of the other women that I spoke to were unsure about whether or not they'd come today because of it. Libby, I'm not. Can you still hear me? Because I actually cannot hear you.
Nicole. It's okay. I don't know if you can hear me. Keep going.
I'm gonna toss it back to you and pick up.
All right, we'll check in with Nicole Ellis in just a little while. That marching band getting tuned up behind her. It sounds pretty loud. Rhonda Colvin, we saw Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee just a little while ago. There on that West Front, prepared to celebrate this moment, and she has on, I believe it was a Biden-Harris mask, and she just looked so happy. And she's one of those liberal members of the Democratic Party who has just been waiting for this day for two reasons, Rhonda. One, to see a Democratic president sworn in, but also to see Donald Trump out of office.
That's right. She and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus as well. I'm also thinking of Maxine Waters, who was among the very first lawmakers to say that Trump should be impeached way back in early in his presidency. There are many members of Congress who are looking forward to this sort of page turn that they're going to experience today. But they also know that their work ahead of them is pretty hard. The House is a majority Democrat chamber right now, but it's only a majority by a thread. And so is the Senate. Senate is now 50-50. So I know lawmakers know that this is not an easy road ahead for any Democratic lawmaker. It's not an easy road ahead for the whole Congress as a whole. And I think they're very aware of that. They have some bills coming up soon that are over some really weighty issues, the coronavirus, additional stimulus, the economy. They've also got the confirmation hearings of the Biden cabinet. They started yesterday with 5 of those hearings, and that's just going to be going on in the days and weeks ahead. They've got a lot on their plate right now, but this is a moment so many of Biden's supporters on the Hill are taking in that their candidate won, and that they're probably also looking forward to potentially a less tumultuous relationship with the executive office.
And there's the team about to be sworn in as president and vice president. Joe Biden and his wife, also Kamala Harris and her husband. The president-elect and vice president-elect being greeted by congressional leaders. congressional leaders flanking them as they walk up the steps. You could see there Leader Pelosi and also Leader McConnell. You see there Senator Roy Blunt. He's the chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. That's why he's there. The president-to-be, Joe Biden, heading into the Capitol along with the soon-to-be First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, the soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Harris walking in with her husband, Doug Emhoff, the soon-to-be second gentleman. And as I mentioned there, Senator Blunt, if you're wondering what the soon-to-be president is wearing, he's got that navy suit and navy overcoat on by American designer Ralph Lauren, and Dr. Biden is wearing that ocean blue wool coat. That's by an American designer, Alexandra O'Neill. James Hohmann, things like fashion are just such a sort of a classic and normal part of what we talk about in terms of the signaling at a moment like this.
Yeah, Libby, absolutely, and it's part of the return to tradition. Obviously, we've never seen a second gentleman before. Doug Emhoff will be the first, and our first female vice president and first vice president of South Asian descent. But so much about this just feels so normal, despite the pandemic, despite the small crowd, because of the security situation, despite the fact that the president's not there. That back and forth exchange we were just watching between Amy Klobuchar and Roy Blunt, those are the top two members of the Senate Rules Committee, which is in charge of putting on the inauguration. Roy Blunt, establishment Republican senator from Missouri. Klobuchar obviously ran for president. You know, it was a little awkward because of COVID, and I think Roy Blunt wanted to give a hug to Kamala Harris, but didn't feel like he should because of COVID. But there was something so normal about that. That's how this process is supposed to play out. That you know, they all serve together. You know, in the Senate, Blunt and Klobuchar were both in the Senate when Biden was there before he became vice president, and they both served with Kamala Harris. And so this is sort of the pageantry of democracy. You know, and our colleague Robin Gavin, who has won a Pulitzer Prize for her fashion commentary and criticism, wrote a great piece today about sort of the power look that both Biden and Harris bring to this. You know, Biden with his cufflinks, and he likes to wear pocket squares, and Harris just projects a lot of strength with her sartorial choices. So it is nice to be able to talk about fashion instead of you know, the kind of chaos that surrounds us.
James, I saw the Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser a little while ago wearing a bright thing. It did remind me of the hats worn by thousands of people as they came and protested right after Donald Trump's inauguration 4 years ago. Yes,
the Women's March, and it really is remarkable. That was 4 years ago. That was the Saturday after the inauguration, and you know, Washington, there was a much bigger crowd for the Women's March than there was for the inauguration, which led to Sean Spicer's famous first briefing where he insisted that the crowd was the largest ever. This year, obviously, no crowd on the Mall, but that's because of the pestilence and I think the petulance of the president, which led to the insurrection of the mob and the riot and the forced lockdown of our Capitol. But you know, there's always interesting fashion choices because it is this traditional moment. I actually have been thinking back to Kellyanne Conway, and I don't know, remember with the outfit she wore, which sort of made her look like a revolutionary soldier 4 years ago. It was this kind of funny outfit that she was very proud of. And so you always, you know, Roger Stone was proudly seated very prominently at the inauguration 4 years ago, someone who would only months later go before Congress and lie under oath about his statements and contacts with Russian agents, including Julian Assange. So it's a very different feel than 4 years ago, but it's in some ways a much more similar feel, even with the masks and the smaller crowd, to Barack Obama's inaugural. In 2009, it's the start of a new era. It's the transfer of power from one party to another. There's Chris Murphy from Connecticut. So you're seeing that Steve Scalise on the right, someone who also voted to overturn the election results from Arizona and Pennsylvania, but is now here today for this transfer of power that I wish we could say was peaceful, but we no longer can.
And he's joined there by House Majority Whip James Clyburn. Rhonda, it is remarkable to see these two gentlemen, these two powerful leaders, walk through the crypt of the Capitol, heading to this inaugural moment, a location that was overrun by rioters just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, to the day, almost to the hour, really. So today we are kind of replacing the images that we've all been seeing of these insurrectionists on the Capitol steps. And remember, some of them climbed that platform behind me. They tried to tear it down. They tried to gain entry into the Capitol through that way. And that was only 14 days ago. So a lot has happened. And I know that the insurrection is still on the minds of House and Senate members. I think, in fact, it has caused some of this bipartisan spirit you're seeing today. I've seen Ted Cruz there in the crowd too, and he was one of the first senators to gather a group of other senators to object to Joe Biden's electoral victory. So it's interesting to see him there, but I would suspect it's a part of that political calculation that's going on right now with the Republican Party, who they're trying to distance themselves from Trump right now, and they also know that they are in the minority in both chambers, even though by slim margins, they're still in the minority. And to get anything done, especially in the Senate with a 50-50 power makeup, they're going to have to reach across the aisle to get anything done. In fact, Chuck Schumer, who will later today be the majority leader of the Senate, he and Mitch McConnell, because the chamber is 50-50, they're going to have to work together on committee assignments, on procedural rules, because there is now this forced compromise because their sides have an equal number. So it's always interesting to see who shows up to these things, but it seems like a lot of Republicans are trying to gather and make this a moment of bipartisanship. I don't know if it will last beyond today, but at least today they are gathering together.
Yeah, and Rhonda, I mean that's a basic bar. I might even say a low bar to attend the inauguration. It is such an important moment in what's expected of leaders of Congress, of course, to attend today. Let's return now to Hannah Jewell on the National Mall. So, Hannah, DC has been on edge after those unprecedented events, the attack on January 6th, but inaugural protests have happened, throughout history. So tell us more about inaugural protests.
Well, Libby, I also just want to point out, while you were talking about American fashion brands earlier, the inaugural committee has actually handed out Ford branded, manufactured, I assume, face masks to people who needed them for a double masking policy here. So lesser known American fashion house, Ford Motors. But yeah, Libby, as you were saying, something else that's missing from today that you would get in a normal inauguration is peaceful protest. And while the country has obviously never seen anything quite like the riots on January 6th, there is a long history of people coming to protest inauguration specifically, with various degrees of violence and peace. So an example of that was the Nixon inauguration, 1969. There was protesters launched what they called the counter-inaugural, and they got really close to Nixon himself. These were anti-Vietnam War protesters, and they were throwing projectiles at the Secret Service as he walked down the parade route that we'll see later today. In George W. Bush's first inauguration in 2001, there were those protesting that very contested election. And then, of course, as you were mentioning earlier, 4 years ago at Trump's inauguration, there were many protests, including the Women's March, which the day following his inauguration. And that march had echoes of another important inauguration protest, which was the 1913 Women's Suffrage Procession, which was timed to deliberately overshadow Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. They marched the day before his inauguration, and they took the same parade route. And Wilson was apparently a little miffed that when he arrived the day before his inauguration, there weren't those crowds to greet him because they were all down at the Women's March, which was seen as very scandalous at the time, I have to say, women marching for the right to vote incredibly scandalous. And that parade was actually unable to finish. Well, it did eventually finish, but it was stopped for many hours by a very violent mob who attacked them, and police forces were unable to stop the counter protesters who were attacking these women. They were outnumbered, and there was some concern that they weren't interested in trying to stop that mob. They did eventually make it to the end. Many women were injured in that process, but as a result of that attack, they got so much media attention, and people were so outraged that these women had been attacked, that the police hadn't protected them, that they once again overshadowed Wilson. The front pages the next day were about the women's parade and not about Wilson himself. I was also thinking about Andrew Jackson's inauguration. After he was inaugurated, you know, he was seen as this big populist. He led a crowd of people into the White House, where they kind of stormed the place, were stepping on furniture, breaking things, shoving servers out of the way. And it was seen by Jackson's enemies as this horrible mob and this, you know, heralding the end of democracy as Americans knew it. But Jackson would say that that was a proof of his success of his populist project, right? And of bringing democracy into the White House, and men in their working boots being able to climb on the furniture was a great thing from his point of view. So I'll be down here on the Mall, where there continues to not be any crowds. Would be very surprising if they did make it through the miles of fencing and soldiers and all that. I feel like we might be the only spot without a brass band playing behind us, but we will hear Lady Gaga. Hopefully, she has a very powerful voice that might make it all the way down the Mall to where we are. Libby?
Thanks so much, Hannah Jewell, reporting from a quiet National Mall. Just such a potent symbol of how America is dealing with so many crises right now. We're seeing former presidents and former vice presidents gather. Former Vice President Dan Quayle, soon to be seen there out on that West Front. A few moments ago, we saw the Senate Pro Temp, also the soon-to-be Senate Pro Temp Pat Leahy, switching roles there shortly as the control of the Senate flips. We'll be watching for the former Vice President Dan Quayle and his wife, also the former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary Hillary Clinton. So far, I've only noticed Dan Quayle, not his wife yet. So we'll see if she is there as well. Karin Demerjen, you know, Rhonda was talking to us about the Republicans who are attending, and we've seen many of them, of course. But it is expected. I mean, let's not give too much credit for just showing up today. This is what's expected of leaders of Congress as they recognize the transfer of power.
Yeah, I think after any other presidency, we wouldn't be, you know, talking quite so much about, oh my goodness, look at who showed up, look at who showed up. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be there. And obviously in a normal year, there would be more human beings there, including lawmakers as well. So what it's you know, says something that the normalcy of this is something that we're finding somewhat surprising and shocking as well. And that's just a testament to the fact that it's been a pretty divisive last 4 years. It's been very, very partisan. It continues to be. Remember, next week we are launching an impeachment trial in the Senate, and almost assuredly that's going to be happening, which means, you know, that the wounds of the past are not healed over just because it's the dawn of a new presidency. But this is a gesture, at least, of people trying to reorient themselves and start off at least in the right position, the traditional position of how this is supposed to go. And, you know, we'll see how long it holds. Sorry to be a skeptic.
Let's go now to reporter Lee Powell, who joins us from the Capitol. Lee, tell us about what you're witnessing firsthand.
Well, hello, Libby, once again from the west front of the Capitol, where the crowd has really started to fill in as you've been recounting to viewers. Familiar faces you see making their appearance, current lawmakers, former lawmakers. I think I saw John Kerry just right below our position here. With the Marine Band still working through their program. So that's what you hear in the background. But it's really a remarkable scene, one you would typically associate with an inauguration, a gathering of former and current and past lawmakers. But what makes it so different is just COVID and the distancing that's happening this year. I've seen people kind of awkwardly doing fist bumps or arm bumps. Taking selfies, but everybody's at a distance. The seats are at a distance. Everybody's kind of trying to find their way here.
I just want to pause you for that. We're seeing Dan Quayle arrive. I want to just let people know, because if you haven't seen him lately, Of course, he looks a lot older than we remember him as serving as vice president. So that is Dan Quayle wearing a mask, the former vice president, part of the routine appearance of these leaders. There you see Steve Scalise, a leader among Republicans in the House. Lee, I didn't want to cut you off. I just want to share with our viewers who they're seeing arrive. So please continue.
No, that's perfectly all right, Libby. And in fact, what's been happening is the Marine Band has been playing, and every so often the public address announcer will come on and make that introduction, and people will turn, if they can, see if they're up on the upper platform and turn to see who's coming down those steps to make their appearance and find their seats here. So as I've been saying, I was telling you earlier, a gathering of current and past lawmakers, other familiar faces here, everybody kind of greeting one another, trying to find their way to their socially distanced seats and getting settled in. I will tell you that it looks like that the seats that are most closest to the platform, closest to the podium, actually appear to have a small bundle, a blanket with a presidential or some kind of a seal on it, Navy blanket. So those lawmakers, especially probably the former presidents who are going to be sitting up there and their wives, have some warmth on a day that has gotten cloudy, sunny, going back and forth. The wind will pick up, the wind will die down. So all in all, it's a cool day. Maybe they would even say a cold day, blustery day. But the sun, as it is now, making an appearance through the clouds. I will leave you with this. I will be in this position watching the program as it goes on with the trusty pair of these of binoculars to see who's gate. We can judge by facial expressions, who's looking at who, what reactions may happen during certain points in the program as we inch closer to the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th president. Libby, back to you.
Thanks so much, Lee Powell. And I'm watching there off screen because it looks like I can see, yes, the former President Bill Clinton, former Secretary Hillary Clinton making their way through the crypt to the platform where they will witness Joe Biden take the oath of office in just a little over an hour. James Hohmann, I've been thinking so much about what's been going through these lawmakers' minds as they've walked through this. Really, let's just listen for a moment here. James, I was saying, I wonder what's going through their minds as they walk through the Capitol, the scene of such devastation and horror just 2 weeks ago. But you also have to think about what's going through the mind of Hillary Clinton as she takes this walk today, James.
Yeah, she has to love it. So both Bill and Hillary Clinton were electors for Biden in New York, where they live now. And obviously, Bill Clinton didn't really have a role on the campaign trail this year because of the Me Too movement. He was viewed as dangerous by the Biden campaign, so they did not bring him out. And he loves this kind of thing, and this is the first time we've seen them in a while. Hillary Clinton has to feel great that Trump's a one-term president. There's no love lost between them. Obviously, there was history between the Clintons and the Trumps. Bill and Hillary went to Donald and Melania's wedding in Mar-a-Lago in 2005. But this is, if you think about it, it's now been 28 years since Bill Clinton was inaugurated, and you think about how much the country has changed even since Clinton lost that race 4 years ago. It's also interesting when you think about the former presidents who are coming in, even Dan and Marilyn Quayle. They really are part of this small club, and it is this experience that no one can really appreciate. There's George and Laura Bush coming in, and it's this, the Clintons and the Bushes got a lot closer, even though they had the nasty campaign in 1992 and 2000, because they have this shared experience of being president. But it's hard to imagine Trump being either welcomed in that very small club or wanting to participate in it, and that, I think, is reflected by the fact he's not there.
Rhonda Colvin, as we watch the Bushes make their way out, Hillary Clinton will witness today another crack in that glass ceiling that she came so close to shattering, Rhonda, seeing a woman sworn in as vice president.
That's right. And I'm sure that that moment is going through her mind as well, and being on hand to witness it, and knowing that she quite potentially had a role in the lead up to now having a female vice president. Today, there's a lot of history today, and that is part of it, that Kamala Harris will be sworn in before Joe Biden. She'll be sworn in as the vice president, and she will be the first Black vice president as well as the first Asian vice president, and she will be sworn in by the first Latina member of the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of representation just in her swearing in. And then even later today, when she swears in John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, two senators from the Deep South making history themselves, that's another part of this day, that we're seeing this transition of power. We're also seeing progress. And it's striking to just sit back and think about, in these same hallways that they're walking down, in doors that were broken in, where we saw hateful imagery, we are now seeing America progress with the first female vice president.
Former President Barack Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, making their way through now.
The 43rd President of the United States, the Honorable George W. Bush and Mrs. Laura Bush.
And you can hear the announcement for the 43rd president, 44 soon to come. Current Emergent, we are witnessing these political leaders come together today at this moment to bear witness to the transfer of power. Karin, it's not a peaceful transfer of power because of the attack 2 weeks ago. But it will be a historic moment for Joe Biden to be sworn in, someone who has been part of politics for so many decades here in America, and for them to see Kamala Harris sworn in. Reflect for us on the history-making moment here of the incoming team.
I mean, it's like you said, this has not been a peaceful transfer of power. It's not been a normal last few months, and it's been a very contentious last few years. And obviously Biden's come back in coming into power, promising a return to a state of normalcy. So in a way, it's almost fitting that you see this march of past presidents, not including President Trump, because that is the time that Biden wants to return to. George W. Bush being the last Republican president who occupied the office before Trump is almost a memory of a distant time. Clearly, we were arguing about big things back then too, Iraq War, Social Security privatization and things like that, but a different time than what the last 4 years have felt like, both in terms of the partisanship in DC and across the country, and the tension that exploded 2 weeks ago in that riot on the Capitol. And I think we're about to see the Obamas come in, and of course, that's the era that Biden is promising the return back to. That's his whole team, comes from the Obama administration. And you can hear the cheers. It's not really a surprise that they would get that reception coming in. This is the president Biden served directly under as number 2.
Rhonda, earlier today, former President Barack Obama tweeted out, "Congratulations to my friend, President Joe Biden. This is your time," with a photo of the two of them together. We all remember how gracious the Obamas were 4 years ago as they transitioned to the Trump family, and they sat here on this, west side of the Capitol, listening to Donald Trump give his American Carnage speech, as it's been, come to be known by. Rhonda, what a different moment for these former presidents to witness today.
That's right. It's quite a different moment. I mean, there was a lot of sadness around the country at the last inauguration with Donald Trump. I remember being with people who were preparing to come for the Women's March, and just the level of sadness when they heard President Trump's inauguration speech. So this is a little bit of a different tone, yes. And the Obamas are amid friends, really. They, of course, are close to the Bidens, and they wanted to see this moment. They campaigned hard for him, especially in that last stretch, those pivotal days in Pennsylvania, which Pennsylvania became the state that put Joe Biden over the edge. And Obama gave rousing speeches at drive-ins during those weeks. So this is a moment for them too. They have talked about how they've worked with Joe Biden over the years. They know that he is capable of running the country at this moment. So this is something that I think they're taking joy in right now.
Supreme Court arriving there, Chief Justice John Roberts, who will be, of course, pivotal to that moment, that swearing in. We also saw Justices Kagan, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, James Homan. You can see there Justice Sotomayor.
There's Justice Barrett, and what's striking, they were the last three in the line because they're the most junior justices because they were just appointed in the last 4 years, and that is a kind of a visualization of Trump's legacy and impact, which he mentioned during his speech earlier, appointing nearly 300 judges, and is going to have a massive impact on the country for a very, very long time going forward. And John Roberts, as he comes on, I was sort of wondering, Barack Obama came on right before Roberts. I wonder if Obama thinks back to January 2009 when Roberts flubbed the oath and had to go re-administer it later in the day. But the Supreme Court obviously not taking up Trump's challenges to try to overturn the election, despite the conservative majority on the court. And you have these justices who are part of the power structure. You see the three Trump appointees standing there. In some ways, the kind of the most glaring visualization of Trump that's there. There's Amy Coney Barrett, who replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the final weeks of the president's term, and it's interesting also with Roberts. There's Tom Perez, the outgoing chairman of the Democratic National Committee. It's interesting with Roberts because there's a lot of speculation over whether he is, and we're seeing him right now, is going to preside over the second Trump impeachment trial. We don't know when the articles are going to be sent over, but now Trump is a former president. The Constitution, when it talks about impeachments, says that when the president is impeached, that the Chief Justice shall preside over the trial. We're in uncharted territory here. And there's some question about whether Roberts will do that or Kamala Harris will preside because he's the former president and not the current president. There's been some reporting that Roberts doesn't really want to get tied into the political mess, and that Harris will end up doing it, but the Supreme Court has declined to comment thus far, and neither has the Senate. Ultimately, it will be a decision that the senators themselves will have to reach.
You're seeing the Biden family arrive there. It's Hunter Biden and Ashley Biden, children of the Bidens, as well as the grandchildren are there. And you saw a few moments ago the children and stepchildren of the soon-to-be vice president and soon-to-be second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, arriving just a few moments ago. That's who came in. James, you mentioned the presence of the Supreme Court justices is so significant. If you are someone who has supported Donald Trump and believed his lies about the legitimacy of the election and believed his lies about the role of the Supreme Court or Vice President Pence, this has to be sort of a shocking turn of events.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of the president's allies and the president himself kind of pushed this idea that the courts would come through even before the election, when Trump was making clear that if he lost, he was going to challenge the legitimacy of his defeat. We're counting on the court to come through. Trump famously referred to judges by who appointed them: Bush judges, Obama judges, Trump judges, and 95 different judges rejected Trump's efforts to overturn the election, including many Trump-appointed judges. And that fits with what John Roberts has said for years, which is there are no Republican judges or Democratic judges. It ultimately, obviously, there are conservatives and liberals, and a lot of times people do play to type in their decisions, but that the judiciary is independent, and that in some ways the judicial system passed a very critical test over the last 3 months, a stress test.
The Biden family arriving now and being greeted warmly. Karin, family is so important to Joe Biden, and yesterday we saw him really in tears as he reflected on his time leaving Delaware, also the loss of his son, Beau Biden, someone who he believed would someday become president in this moment. Talk to us about the relationship of family in a moment like this.
I mean, family is always important in a moment like this, and for Biden, his family was pulled through the ringer in the last several months. So, we know the Biden story.
Karin, I'm just going to pause you for a moment as we work on your connection there. We can see the Vice President Mike Pence, and we can see his wife Karen Pence there. coming through. We'll see them soon announced, and of course, we'll be watching for the crowd reception to the Vice President Mike Pence and his wife, the current Second Lady. Rhonda, important to note that the Vice President did not attend Donald Trump's send-off this morning. Instead, he is electing to attend, as is expected of him, really, the inauguration today.
He did not. He was not there. And it also shows you perhaps he's thinking of his own political ambitions too, beyond this, beyond being vice president. He has decided to show up for this. And I think, to my knowledge, this is the first time he has been in the Capitol since the insurrection. So this is something that Mike Pence is choosing to support instead of his running mate there and partner for the last 4 years, Donald Trump, who said he would not be a part of these festivities. So I think this has a lot, again, to do with that political calculation that a lot of Republicans are thinking about right now. And he, as somebody who witnessed the events of January 6th and had to be shuttled away very quickly when the insurrectionists came into the Capitol, he's aware of how much that divisive rhetoric really affected Capitol Hill.
I mean, Karin, Rhonda makes such a sort of a devastating point that Mike Pence was very close, really, to being a victim of that Capitol riot 2 weeks ago, and now he's returned.
Yeah, and he's here. I mean, look, he made a fairly historic statement that night when they came back into the Senate saying, they're not going to be deterred. Mitch McConnell then followed up by saying they weren't going to be deterred from confirming Biden's win. So, Pence kind of was abandoned by the president and his supporters who were in that mob as well on that day. And he didn't make a full break with Trump, but it's significant that he's the person here representing the transfer of power. And he was the person in the Capitol who almost got personally attacked by the people who couldn't accept the fact that there would be a transfer of power.
James, Joe Biden has worked for this moment for decades. He first ran for president in the 80s. This is his third time running for president. What does it mean for him to be here today?
The third time's the charm. Yeah. He's had a lot of inaugurations to attend. He got elected when Richard Nixon was still president, and he has attended every inauguration since Jimmy Carter's in 1976. In two of them, he was sworn in as the vice president, and he looked for a long time like he was never going to achieve that ultimate dream of his, and now he has. This is hugely important to him. He's a big believer in institutions, and he's a big believer in the power of pageantry. So this is incredibly meaningful to him, and there's a big question of whether he is able to kind of hold it together. He got very emotional yesterday as he was leaving Delaware, talking about kind of the pride that he felt about representing Delaware, and as he became president, and so I think that this will be an incredibly kind of meaningful moment for him, and it's the kind of thing where you can imagine it, showing just the weight of this office coming on you, seeing Barack Obama there, who he served with, seeing these former presidents who he often clashed with. When he was when Bush was president, he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Will be fascinating to see. But it is kind of amazing that he's had to comment on a dozen inaugurations, and this one is going to be the one where he gets to make the speech for history.
Vice President Pence being greeted by Congressman Clyburn, former presidents. This is how he's choosing to spend his last hour, his last moments as Vice President, James.
It is, and it's telling. It shouldn't be a big deal that he's there, but this is a symbolic last snub of Trump. Trump didn't want him there, and Pence felt that he had to go. He's trying to, I think, in a lot of ways, rehabilitate his image by going. He called Kamala Harris last week and offered her Air Force Two to come to Washington. He's trying to I think in some ways play the role that a former president like Trump normally would play, I would expect that you will see Pence at future inaugurations for Democratic and Republican presidents, the same way we saw Dan Quayle. He is someone who wants to be seen as supportive of the institution, and he still has ambitions to run for president himself in 2024. I'm not sure that that's going to work, but he's trying to show the country that and the world that American democracy still works. But it's hard to overstate that this is a symbolic rejection of Trump, even if it isn't really that big a deal to be there. This is not something Trump wanted him to do.
Rhonda, even looking at the masks is part of this symbolism. And I just want to pause for a moment and mention that you see there President Donald Trump, the First Lady Melania Trump, getting off of Air Force One in Florida. Our colleague Josh Dawsey is on the tarmac and reports there are no supporters or fanfare at Palm Beach Airport as they were awaiting this final arrival. Quiet in Florida. Rhonda, a very different experience that he will have to get used to, the quiet that comes with no longer holding the power of the presidency. Because all eyes now, Rhonda, turn away from Donald Trump and go here to the west front of the Capitol and the swearing in of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Right, and it's striking to see that, the split screen of a former president or soon to be former in almost minutes, arriving and not getting any fanfare. It sort of shows you sort of the, I'm going to go ahead and stop right there so we can listen in. So he's arriving there in Florida, and it's in stark contrast to what we're seeing here in Washington. All of Washington and also the world is watching what's happening behind me, and it's a lonely start for President Trump and Melania Trump to start off their new life in a fashion where many of their supporters on the Hill are right here with Biden at this moment right now. You know, Mitch McConnell, who over the last 4 years kind of had Trump's legislative back in the Senate and put through so many of those judicial nominees. And then you have Kevin McCarthy, and you have Mike Pence as the icing on the cake of people who were so supportive of the president who are now respecting the institution of government right now instead of spending their last hours with him or supporting him. So it remains to be seen how President Trump transitions into this new life that he will now be living. He said we will hear from him soon in some fashion. He said that earlier in his remarks today, but we don't know how that will play out. And we do know he's a president who is drawn to this idea of being relevant and always being in the news. So I suspect we will hear from him at some point. How we will, I'm not sure, but he and his wife are now going to have to deal with this new life.
And potential legal fallout, Karin. I mean, you know, we'll see what lies in store for the former president, Donald Trump, but legal trials may be part of that. And we'll see what he goes on and chooses to do with his time as he prepares to no longer be president in just under an hour. For now, though, let's look at these former presidents who have chosen to be here today on this inauguration day. Karin, I was remarking a moment ago about, you know, the fashion of masks is even something to note on a historic day like this. You can imagine the Smithsonian wanting to collect some of these examples of how Americans in political leadership chose to mark the occasion. The Biden granddaughters, very on point with masks that match their outfits. I want to know who decorated, who got them ready today. But we're seeing today this display on the Capitol of comedy and respect, Karin. You know, how much will that resonate with the American people is a question we'll all be asking.
I indeed. And I also just want to point out the video we just were watching was of Eugene Robinson, the cop who held back that mob, who's just one of the greatest people in the Capitol, I have to say. So just the faces that we don't recognize walking by too are kind of important to note in this sort of ceremony. I was actually struck by the number of politicians who have chosen to be very understated with their masks and are just wearing some basic black or some basic white and keeping it classy that way. You know, they are trying to normalize this. And coming after several months in which, Trump didn't wear a mask. People around him gathered in close proximity, didn't wear masks for official events. The fact that they're being very serious about this is it's striking, and it's trying to basically say this is the way things are going to be. We're going to be more responsible about addressing the pandemic, even when it comes to individual acts of basic, decent, keeping other people safe and keeping yourself from collecting what germs are floating around.
Karin,
So
I just
yes, the
want to pause you for a
Biden
moment.
family
Yes,
is
I want to
doing-
pause you for a moment and go to James Homan now. As we see Pete Buttigieg there and his husband, Pete Buttigieg, part of the incoming administration, if he makes it through that confirmation process, which has been delayed so far, very out of step with what's happened for prior presidents coming in. As we see there, Bill Clinton talking to Mike Pence.
Maria Miller-Lohmeyer, the acting Deputy House Sergeant-at-Arms, Kevin Grubbs, and the acting Deputy Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, United States Capitol Police Officer Private First Class Eugene O. Goodman. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President-elect of the United States, Kamala Devi Harris, and Mr. Douglas Emhoff.
The soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Devi Harris being greeted by family now, but before that, of course, former President Barack Obama and his wife. Just a historic moment. Rhonda Colvin, as Kamala Harris hugs her husband. What a journey for this woman to be here today.
What a journey, right? She's walking through the hallways of where she started her career here in Washington, and she has only been in the Senate since 2016. So this certainly is now a really momentous occasion for her politically in her political career, but also just for America. Despite what party you're in, you can really take note that this is historical that you're watching right now. This is the first female vice president of the United States. And she's accompanied by the second gentleman of the United States. This is a lot of history just to take in and watch and just really soak in. And she's starting her job pretty quickly today. She will later on, she will swear in Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in the 4 o'clock hour. Those are the two men who won the Georgia runoff and put the U.S. Senate into Democrat hands. And they're also making history as well. Jon Ossoff is the first Jewish member of the U.S. Senate to come from the Deep South. And Raphael Warnock is the first Black man to serve in the Senate from the state of Georgia. So there's a lot of history going on today, and she's a centerpiece in that history.
James, Kamala Harris served as a senator, as Rhonda mentioned. She served as Attorney General of California. She was even a Senate intern.
Yeah.
And now she stands before us, soon to be the first woman vice president of the United States.
It really is a remarkable meteoric rise, and and it's just an unlikely story of amazing American success, living the American dream, the daughter of an immigrant, and the firsts are really something special. she's going to be sworn in with 2 Bibles today. One of them was the Bible of Thurgood Marshall, the first African American Supreme Court justice, and another is the Bible of a close family friend who Harris has said helped basically raise her. And Harris is reminded of a line her mother, her late mother, Shamala, used to always say, which was always be the first at things, don't be the last at things. And this is a historic first. You know, when we think back to how history will remember today, it's most likely, you know, in 50 years' time, we'll remember the pandemic, we'll remember January 6th, but the history that's being made is that we finally have cracked that glass ceiling, not the ultimate glass ceiling, but we're going to have a woman as vice president. And that it really is just an amazing moment in our national story.
And Rhonda, as James pointed out, a woman with an immigrant story, which was highlighted during the Democratic convention, something that obviously was important in Kamala Harris trying to help the American people get to know her as she stepped into this high-profile role of being a presidential candidate, as well as becoming the vice presidential candidate. And now we see the soon-to-be president and the soon-to-be first lady, they themselves breaking barriers in their own ways, Rhonda. You know, Joe Biden to be the oldest president at the swearing in, Dr. Jill Biden, someone who has a well-established career that she plans to continue here as she goes into this role as an educator. The Bidens have talked about how education is important to them as a platform of politics as well. Rhonda, what does this moment mean for Dr. Jill Biden?
You know, I think it means a lot for her to see her husband finally reach this moment that she has watched him try to get to in previous cycles. And, you know, she's also a supporter of the military. So it's going to be interesting to watch what type of initiatives she decides to take on as First Lady. When she was Second Lady, she did a lot of work with military families, having come from a military family, and also her stepson, Beau, also served in the military. So that is a part of her platform, or was before, and I'm sure she will continue that on. And as you mentioned too, she is planning to continue to teach, which she did as Second Lady too, but her job as First Lady is often a little busier. So it's going to be interesting to see her keep up her career, keep up what she went to school for to get a doctorate in. And there was some, okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap so we can watch these scenes.
So much, Rhonda Colvin, James Homan, Karan Demerjen. Stay with the Washington Post as we bring you this inauguration coverage as some snowflakes begin to fall on this January 20th. You can see there Senator Klobuchar with Hunter Biden, one of the Biden's children, and a grandchild there. Inauguration Day. Let's watch as the Joint Congressional Committee comes in, as we also see we prepare to see very shortly the future president and first lady come in. And, you know, we'll bring this all to you today. And there's so much else for us to cover here at the Washington Post as the afternoon goes on. Our colleagues have been talking about just what is in store. A very busy work day on soon to be president and vice president's agenda here. This is live coverage from the Washington Post, the inauguration of Joseph R. Biden as president.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice President Pence, Mr. President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to this stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does: goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible. My friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda till I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially begin the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank the Joint Committee staff and our partners, particularly our security partners, for the way they've dealt with unprecedented circumstances. When I chaired the inauguration 4 years ago, I shared President Reagan's 1981 description of this event as commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since the Constitution established that determined democracy with its first 3 words, declaring the people as the source of the government. Three words with the words to form a more perfect union. The founders did not say to form a perfect union. They did not claim that in our new country, nothing would need to be improved. Fortunately, they understood that always working to be better would be the hallmark of a great democracy. The freedoms we have today, the nation we have today, is not here just because it happened, and they aren't complete. A great democracy working through the successes and failures of our history, striving to be better than it had been. And we are more than we have been, and we are less than we hope to be. The assault on our Capitol at this very place just 2 weeks ago reminds us that a government designed to balance and check itself is both fragile and resilient. During the last year, the pandemic challenged our free and open society and called for extraordinary determination and sacrifice, and still challenges us today. Meeting that challenge head on have been and are healthcare workers, scientists, first responders, essential frontline workers, and so many others we depend on in so many ways. Today, we come to this moment. People all over the world, as we're here, are watching and will watch what we do here. Our government comes together. The Congress and the courts join the transition of executive responsibility. One political party more pleased today and on every inaugural day than the other. But this is not a moment of division, it's a moment of unification. A new administration begins and brings with it a new beginning. And with that, our great national debate goes forward, and a determined democracy will continue to be essential in pursuit of a more perfect union and a better future for all Americans. What a privilege for me to join you today. Thank you. I'm pleased to call to the podium a longtime friend of the president-elect and his family, Father Leo O'Donovan, to lead us in an invocation. Please stand if you are able and remain standing for the national anthem and the pledge to our flag.
Gracious and merciful God, at this sacred time we come before you in need, indeed on our knees. But we come still more with hope and with our eyes raised anew to the vision of a more perfect union in our land, a union of all our citizens to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We are a people of many races, creeds, and colors, national backgrounds, cultures, and styles, now far more numerous and on land much vaster than when Archbishop John Carroll wrote his prayer for the inauguration of George Washington 232 years ago. Archbishop Carroll prayed that you, O Creator of all, would assist with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude the President of these United States, that his administration may be conducted in righteousness and be eminently useful to your people. Today we confess our past failures to live according to our vision of equality, inclusion, and freedom for all. Yet we resolutely commit still more now to renewing the vision, to caring for one another in word and deed, especially the least fortunate among us, and so becoming a light for the world. There is a power in each and every one of us that lives by turning to every other one of us, a thrust of the Spirit to cherish and care and stand by others, and above all, those most in need. It is called love, and its path is to give ever more of itself. Today, it is called American patriotism, born not of power and privilege, but of care for the common good, with malice toward none and with charity for all. For our new president, we beg of you the wisdom Solomon sought when he knelt before you and prayed for an understanding heart so that I can govern your people and know the difference between right and wrong. We trust in the counsel of the letter of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. He wrote, "We risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Be with us, holy mystery of love, as we dream together. Help us under our new president to reconcile the people of our land, restore our dream and invest it with peace and justice and the joy that is the overflow of love. To the glory of your name, forever, amen."
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of our national colors by the Armed Forces Color Guard, the singing of our national anthem, and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ladies and gentlemen, here for the singing of our national anthem, accompanied by the President's own United States Marine Band, please welcome Lady Gaga.
So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Take us that star-spangled banner yet wave on the land of the free and the hope of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the city of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall, for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's Own United States Marine Band.
This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, oh, this land. This land was made for you and me. You and me. Oh, America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crowned thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea.
Una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
Let's get loud. 'Cause this land was made for you and
Well, that was great. The sun is shining, and Mr. President-elect, this is the first inauguration in the history of America where J-Lo was the warm-up act for Chief Justice Roberts. With that, it is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, to administer the presidential oath to the next President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken. The oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once in a century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. And unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America. We've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay at bed staring at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, or rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. It's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them for becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die in our watch, but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Hard not to be reminded of hard not to be reminded of President Obama's singing that same song at the Mother Emanuel Church. A song that in our culture is as close to both poetry and prayer as you could possibly come. And we're going to finish with those two things. Let me introduce Amanda Gorman, our nation's first ever National Poet Laureate.
Mr. President, when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Thank you, Amanda Gorman. Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware, a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
As a nation and people of faith gathered in this historical moment, let us unite in prayer. God, we gather under the beauty of your holiness and the holiness of your beauty. We seek your face, your smile, your warm embrace. We petition you once more in this celebration. We pray for divine favor upon our President, Joseph R. Biden, and our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and their family. We further ask that you would extend the same favor upon our Vice President, Kamala D. Harris, and our Second Gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and their family. More than ever, More than ever, they in our nation need you. We need you, for in you we discover our common humanity. In our common humanity, we will seek out the wounded and bind their wounds. We will seek healing for those who are sick and diseased. We will mourn our dead. We will befriend the lonely, the least, and the left out. We will share our abundance with those who are hungry. We will do justly to the oppressed, acknowledge sin, and seek forgiveness, thus grasping reconciliation. In discovering our humanity, we will seek the good in and for all our neighbors. We will love the unlovable, remove the stigma of the so-called untouchables. We will care for our most vulnerable, our children, the elderly, emotionally challenged, and the poor. We will seek rehabilitation beyond correction. We will extend opportunity to those locked out of opportunity. We will make friends of our enemies. We will make friends of our enemies. People, your people, shall no longer raise up weapons against one another. We will rather use our resources for the national good and become a beacon of life and goodwill to the world. And neither shall we learn hatred anymore. We will lie down in peace and not make our neighbors afraid. In you, O God, we discover our humanity. In our humanity, we discover our commonness. Beyond the difference of color, creed, origin, political party, ideology, geography, and personal preferences. We'll become greater stewards of your environment, preserving the land, reaping from it a sustainable harvest, and securing its wonder and miracle-giving power for generations to come. This is our benediction, that from these hallowed grounds, where slaves labored to build this shrine and citadel to liberty and democracy, let us all acknowledge, from the indigenous Native American to those who recently received their citizenship, from the African American to those whose foreparents came from Europe and every corner of the globe, from the wealthy to those struggling to make it, from every human being, regardless of their choices, that this is our country. As such, teach us, O God. As such, teach us, O God, to live in it, love in it, be healed in it, and reconcile to one another in it, lest we miss kingdom's goal. To your glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. In the strong name of our collective faith. Amen.
Please remain standing as the Armed Forces Color Guard retires our national colors. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated and remain in your seats while the President and official party depart the platform. For safety reasons, your ushers will release your section in an organized manner, following the playing of our national march, The Stars and Stripes Forever.
The 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris. You are watching a Washington Post special report for this inauguration ceremony. I'm Libby Casey. Thank you so much for watching this historic event with our newsroom. The tradition of inaugurations dates back to George Washington, and with each presidential address, we witness a new tone and tenor for American politics. We heard Joe Biden announce, "This is Democracy's Day," a triumphant headline marking a new era just 2 weeks after a failed attack on the U.S. Capitol. President Biden pledged to be a leader for all Americans and also asked citizens for help in writing an American story of hope and not fear. We also broke barriers today as Justice Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina on the Supreme Court, administered the oath of office to Kamala Harris, who became the first woman, the first Black, and first South Asian American Vice President. With me this afternoon, Eugene Scott, reporter for The Fix, Capitol Hill reporter Rhonda Colvin, national political correspondent James Hohman. Rhonda, let's start with you for your reactions and highlights of today's inauguration ceremony.
Really, it's just amazing to watch this, even though this is not the typical inauguration that we are all used to. At the moment Joe Biden was sworn in, you could hear across the street where I am the resounding cheers and claps from the people who are attending, and it was quite a moment. And in his speech, I know his team told us for the last few days that he was going to focus on unity. But what we heard also is this really positive view of how things can be if we work together. He was fairly optimistic. If you listen to some of the things that he mentioned, COVID, racial inequality, the economy, after he would mention those things, he would follow it up with saying, "We will prevail." So he was somewhat trying to compel the American people, as well as Congress too, who members are sitting there right there listening to him, to work together with him. He said history is going to judge us in what we do at this really critical time in America's history. And I think he was really working to restore confidence among Americans and also our foreign allies who have also been shaken by some of the events they've seen here on American soil.
Eugene Scott, President Biden saying we must end this uncivil war.
Yes, he was saying that in part because he was very aware of the conflicts, not that just only happened during the riots at the Capitol a couple weeks ago, but there have been civil wars for the last 4 years at least, in the terms of a culture war that existed between many different segments of the American electorate regarding what it is that people believe should be the future of America. And Biden said, for now, this time is a time to come together.
Eugene, what else stood out to you today?
You know, quite frankly, I just think it's been a huge pendulum swing from the Trump administration. If you recall, Trump got so much support in part because many of his voters expressed cultural anxiety about the direction in which America was moving in the Obama administration. And specifically, they expressed concern about how much more ethnically diverse America was becoming, broadening ideas on gender and sexuality, new types of diversity when it comes to faith, values, and religion. And so they swung to Trump. And what we saw with this inauguration is the pendulum swinging backwards. We saw the first Latino on the Supreme Court swearing in, the first Black and Asian and woman vice president. And this showed that what America was moving towards wasn't just away from the Trump administration, but fastly, swiftly, and expeditiously away from a worldview that prioritized some groups over others.
James Hohmann, President Joe Biden talking with so much pride in America, but also trying to strike a tone of personal humility and asking Americans to come together and help him in this effort.
Libby, that really was striking. And inevitably, we'll compare Biden's speech to President Trump's speech, former President Trump's speech 4 years ago. And there really was a shift from Trump 4 years ago saying, I alone can fix it, to Biden today saying, I can only fix it with your help. And repeatedly, he asked for people to help him. He didn't project hubris or confidence. He projected confidence that we will prevail, but he didn't say, I'm going to make it happen. He said, we need to all come together, and putting some of the burden on members of Congress as well. He gave shout outs to the Senate and the House, and there were a lot of implicit contrasts with the former president. He talked about how we need to turn the page from exhausting outrage, which obviously is a critique, but the president who gave the most famous inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln, Biden quoted him and talked about the need to appeal to our better angels, listen to our better angels. And he framed the current struggles in the context of our larger national story. He was deeply, deeply impacted by a book he read in 2018 by John Meacham, who has been advising him. I was told he didn't help write the speech, but has been talking a lot to the president. And Meacham wrote a book that basically contextualized Trump along with all these other episodes in our past, the Klan, McCarthyism, a lot of the tensions of the 1800s, and Biden clearly kind of reciting that frame of this is the story of America. It's this constant battle essentially between good and evil, and all Americans should aspire to be on the side of good. So he's putting himself in that broader national story, and that in and of itself, to your question, Libby, is a humbling place to be. That he recognizes that he is a product of history, and that he's been given this mandate to, as he always said on the campaign trail, restore the soul of America.
Our colleague Lee Powell has had a front row view of today's events at the Capitol. So Lee, what has it been like over this last hour there?
Well, hello again, Libby from the West Front. I'm going to try to give you a few perspectives from someone who was actually sitting here roughly 50 feet away from where Joe Biden took the oath of office. Things you may not have seen or been able to sort of fully realize looking at the screen, looking at our video coverage. What was striking was just the atmosphere. When this started, it was overcast. It was spitting snow, in fact. A reference that Roy Blunt, the senator from Missouri who helped organize this, made in reference to Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, saying, look what you brought us in terms of this snow. But, almost on cue, if you will, when Kamala Harris took the oath of office and then Joe Biden, the clouds kind of parted and the sun came out shining. And during much of that speech, the sun was shining on Joe Biden over the crowd here. What was interesting was that there was some strong applause lines, but it was perhaps muted in a way just from the size of the crowd here. Just the fact that it was so limited in terms of social distancing and the number of people they even let in here. Looking this way, past the seats, past this stage, I could see a huge expanse of grass between here and the reflecting pool, which normally you would see during a normal inauguration, be filled with people. Well, Joe Biden was giving that, now President Biden was giving that address. One thing that was very clear, something that he could not mistake, was looking out past the grass to the reflecting pool along the marble stairs there, just a line of National Guard troops. If you looked further, the blocked off streets, Independence Avenue, Constitution Avenue, the line of troops extending all the way down the empty streets. So it could not have been lost on him the times that he was taking this oath of office, the time that he's entering this office at this very trying time for the country between the pandemic that's raging and just the very real security situation that Washington has undergone or is facing to get ready for this big day. Libby?
Thanks so much, Lee. James Homan, we saw there, just the crowd, just joyfully greeting each other. So challenging in this moment of COVID. Do you hug? Do you not hug? But we're seeing Lady Gaga hanging out with and talking with the former President Barack Obama, Jennifer Lopez, and Alex Rodriguez there with the former presidents and first ladies. It is sort of a rare, joyful moment to witness people coming together at a time when we have seen so few moments in America lately of people coming together.
And it really is. And they clearly want to celebrate. You saw, I think there were a couple handshakes of people who normally wouldn't handshake, but you get caught up in the moment. And it is interesting because 4 years ago, again, Trump, when he talked about American carnage, but he talked about how there was a Washington cartel. And he said members of both parties in Washington have failed you. They've cared more about themselves than you. That was the context of I'm going to end that American carnage right here and right now, sort of attacking the Republicans and the Democrats on stage. And obviously there's a lot of tension between the Republicans and Democrats on this stage, but they're all public servants. And whether you agree with them or disagree with them. And I think that this speech from Biden in this moment is a celebration of public service. And you heard that in Biden's speech, that politics doesn't have to be this icky thing, that politics can actually help accomplish big things to deliver for the American people.
You can see Elizabeth Warren there. Earlier we saw Bernie Sanders, and those two definitely dress for the weather. I'll tell you, they know what it means to come from northern states and dress for winter. We saw a shot just a few moments ago, Rhonda, of the east front of the Capitol, which is where we would normally be seeing members of Congress say farewell to the outgoing president. But of course, Trump is not there. Instead, we see the vice president, the former vice president, rather, Mike Pence there with Karen Pence preparing to exit. So much symbolism here on Capitol Hill, so much order and structure to how things are done. What are you considering as we watch? And there's, of course, Officer Goodman. What are you watching here, Rhonda, as we see the former vice president followed out by the current vice president, Kamala Harris?
It's that full page turn that we are seeing right now. We are seeing the transition from one administration to the other. It's almost as if from the looks of it and from much of the talk on stage today, there was not much mention of the last presidency. And although Biden did say he thanked his predecessors, who many of them are there today, but we're seeing this changeover into a new era, and it does not matter what party you are a part of today. This is a new chapter in the American story. So that's what really, to me, has stood out and that we've seen today. And of course, Mike Pence, the former vice president, is walking out there. Also, we saw one of the other former cabinet members of the Trump administration, Elaine Chao. She was with her husband, Mitch McConnell. So you are seeing this switch over to the next wave. And Biden really tried to highlight that in his speech as well, is that we all have this responsibility to work together in addressing these major problems right now in America.
The new Vice President Kamala Harris and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and the former Vice President Mike Pence and his wife, the former Second Lady Karen Pence. Eugene, just so refreshing to see this transfer of power moment and these two individuals talking. These two individuals who will have a lot in common in terms of the role they play for the American public, but of course, serving a very different position in terms of their relationship to the presidents under which they are serving. We're watching here Mike Pence and Karen Pence process down those Capitol steps to their awaiting ride as they leave no longer the vice president and second lady. Eugene, really a remarkable moment in its simplicity and in its sort of proper order of things as we watch the current vice president see her predecessor off.
Absolutely. And, this is not a moment to be downplayed and certainly not to be ignored. One thing that President Biden helped many of us realize during his stint as vice president to Barack Obama is just how significant the role of vice president could be. And in these final weeks of the Trump administration, there have been quite a few eyes on Mike Pence, especially as the former president attempted to blame him for not making a decision that would overturn the election results. And eyes continue to be on Mike Pence when he decided to make a decision differently from Trump and attend this inauguration and show a level of decency that we have not, quite frankly, seen from Trump regarding his successor, and remain connected to Harris in terms of being present, of being in communication, and having his team work with hers as she seeks to continue the responsibilities that Pence previously had. And it reminds you of what can happen, what power the second in command actually has in terms of shaping a culture, creating some sense of decency and calm in the midst of chaos. And more importantly, perhaps than anything else in this moment, and solidifying their legacy as people begin to look back and reflect on this period in American history.
The Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, and the second gentleman. James, we know that Mike Pence left Kamala Harris a letter in the tradition that he has stuck to. We understand from our colleague Josh Dawsey and a White House spokesperson that Trump has done the same thing for President Biden. But let's talk about what role Kamala Harris will be playing here in this administration.
We still don't fully know. At this point in 2009, we knew that Joe Biden had been in the Senate for 36 years, and he was going to be the point man on the economic recovery, on the Recovery Act, on stimulus, on those kinds of things. Now, because there's a 50-50 split in the Senate and Kamala Harris is going to have to cast the tie-breaking vote quite a lot, she's going to spend a lot more time in the Senate than Mike Pence did when Republicans had a 54 or 53 seats. And so she's going to spend a lot of time in the Senate. She's going to have to cast a lot of votes to end procedural deadlocks. But Biden really hasn't carved out a portfolio for her yet. He has said she's going to be the last person I talk to before I make big decisions. She'll always have a seat at the table. We're going to have lunch every week. But he hasn't said, she has the X portfolio. And obviously, Kamala Harris, every single member of her senior staff that she's hired is also a woman of color. And she is very focused on racial justice issues, but she's also expressed an interest to the Biden team about having a portfolio that's not just racial justice or women's issues, but going into some of the other big crises facing the country.
Let's go now and check in with our colleague Jorge Ribas, who joins us from downtown DC. And despite the security restrictions, small crowds are gathering to celebrate this historic day. Jorge.
Hey, Libby. Yeah, so we're here at the corner of 13th and F, and we're at one of the secondary security checkpoints inside the perimeter. And there's actually a pretty large-sized crowd here, people who are waiting to get in. They're kind of letting people go in as another person comes out. And I'm with a group of people here who came from Fort Worth, Texas, right? And this is Daisha, Racine, and Eva. You guys came and you're dressed. I see you wearing the Chucks. And so talk to me a little bit about why you felt it was important to be here today in DC.
Well, we really came out to support Kamala, being the first African-American, Asian-American vice president ever or elected to office. So that brought us here.
And obviously this was going to be a different inauguration than years past. So there wasn't going to be the large crowd, but you still felt like, tell me, you were talking to me about waiting in line, Racine, and how you didn't even notice you were waiting in line, that you were just talking to people. Tell me a little bit about what it was like sitting here in line.
Right. I mean, the line didn't bother me at all whatsoever. It was just the fact of being here and experiencing the whole inauguration is just on a totally different level. We didn't care about traffic, uh, the obstacles that were in our way, people saying not to come. We wanted to be here to experience a momentous occasion.
And could you talk to me a little bit too about what is it like? What was it you were watching? Were you guys watching on your phone? What was it like, Daisha, watching the new vice president being sworn in? What did that feel like watching that?
It's very emotional and very encouraging. It shows that, as a woman, as a black woman, I can be anything I want to in the world. And it shows, the younger girls too, that you can be whatever you want.
And I need to ask you guys about the shirts a little bit. Could you explain the t-shirts a little bit?
Well, we're in a group on Facebook and it's called Chucks and Pearls, and it's to celebrate Kamala. She wears her chucks with her suits and she's famous for her pearls. And here we are.
And my last question, Racine, is this a new administration's coming in, and what are the things that you're hopeful for? What are you hoping the new administration, the vice president and the president, tackle as it gets going?
Just to bring the country together, like, stop the dividing, stop the hatred, stop everything that's going on, and just bring this country back together and let everyone get along and have peace. That's what we normally want, is just peace. We have peace, everything else will fall in line.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, Libby, so this has felt actually like the most normal part of this inauguration so far. It's just a crowd of people here. We'll go back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Jorge Rivas in downtown DC. Let's check in now with our colleague, Joyce Coe, who's at the White House. So, Joyce, talk to us about what we expect from this new Biden-Harris administration and the challenges ahead.
Well, as President Biden mentioned in his inaugural speech just moments ago, they will be going into and really inheriting a deeply divided nation. This is something that he made mention of, the state of the nation, and it's something that he wants to unite America around. And he talked a lot about defending the truth and defeating lies as it relates to the insurrection on the Capitol and the rhetoric that we've seen from former President Donald Trump. He also said, quote, "My whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join with me in this cause." So the main challenge being that there is a lot of division in this country, especially, 2 weeks following the insurrection and an impeachment looming in the Senate. That is sort of top of mind as far as the state of this country goes in terms of challenges that he is going to be dealing with. Another challenge as far as policy goes is the coronavirus and the economy, and how those two issues are sort of wrapped up into one. The coronavirus is something that is still growing by the day, roughly 200,000 new cases daily. We have lost 400,000 American lives to the pandemic, and that's something, those lives were recognized yesterday during that ceremony with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden at the reflecting pool on the National Mall. But those numbers still climbing, and that is something that Joe Biden as president is wanting to rein in here. And that tied up with the economy. Last week, he announced a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan to address both coronavirus and the economy. So Biden will be taking office at a tumultuous time in American history, as well as dealing with some mammoth issues. Libby?
So, Joyce, we saw Donald Trump leave Washington this morning. He is no longer president as of about an hour ago, but his second impeachment trial has yet to begin in the Senate. So how's that going to complicate President Biden's first days in office?
Well, like I said, there are some major issues that he is trying to address in this country. And Biden has largely wanted to remain out of the narrative of impeachment. We heard very little from him around the time when the House impeached former President Donald Trump for the second time. He was focused on the coronavirus and addressing the economy, and those two issues were top of mind for him. So he has mainly wanted to sort of stay out of the fray of impeachment proceedings, but he has said and really hasn't minced his words for how he feels about Donald Trump. He has said that Trump is one of the most incompetent presidents in history. That was last week. And he has said that the Senate needs to follow through on impeachment while he focuses on those top issues. But the way that Biden navigates through the looming Senate impeachment trial is going to be something to watch. It will be significant as he has made national unity a core part of his message as he enters the White House. Libby?
Thanks so much, Joyce Coe. James Homan, back to you. You know, the Biden administration's plan maybe to just be hands off on this, let the Senate go through its course and process so that the Biden administration can work on its priorities as well as be seen as working on its priorities, right, James? That they're not looking past, they're looking forward. You know, I just was noticing, James, the former President Bill Clinton and, of course, the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton leaving. And as is classic for them, Hillary Clinton was sort of moving a faster pace, and Bill Clinton was lagging behind, talking to everybody. I mean, if you're on the campaign trail back in 2016, you saw that all the time. You know, they get like the "let's roll" from a diner or something, and Hillary would be ready to go. Bill Clinton would be dragging as he talked to so many people. It's just his nature. What is this moment like for them, right, as they watch this transition of power here?
Yeah, it's, you know, in the Bushes too. You know, George W. Bush didn't say who he was voting for, but it almost certainly was Biden. And you know, no love lost between the Bushes and Trump. And I do think that there's this feeling of a return to normalcy, even though we have all these crises, even though we have this pandemic that is far from resolved, the recession, all this. It feels like the system worked. We went through the stress test. We saw a lot of vulnerabilities in our system. We saw that institutions are only as strong as the people who lead them. But ultimately, the system has worked. Donald Trump is no longer president. He hasn't been for almost an hour now, and there was a transfer of power. It wasn't peaceful. It's unfortunate that there's not huge throngs of people, but this is something where I think someone like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, you know, who've been on the national stage for half a century almost, you know, since Bill Clinton got elected governor of Arkansas in 1978, that they're, I think, relieved that sort of the Trump era is over and we can move on to something new.
Rhonda, it's a windy day in Washington, D.C., but the wind is making those flags so beautiful on the National Mall. What's it like where you are?
I'm sorry, Libby, were you speaking to me?
Yes.
I couldn't hear you.
What's it like where you are? Tell us about the scene there, because normally you probably wouldn't even be able to hear us because there would be so much noise from the crowds below.
That's true. Yeah, the noise level has gone down. I believe the military band has played their last songs right now, and there's still this sense of stillness right now on Constitution, where you would typically see a lot of people gathered to watch this procession of the incoming president and vice president, and we don't have that this time. We don't have it because of the security measures that are being taken place. So right now below me, it's still a lot of National Guardsmen and women who are standing there watching over the proceedings, but it's still very still right now. And you're right, it is a little windy, although the sun is coming out. It was snowing right before we started the swearing in ceremony, but the sun came out right as around the time Lady Gaga started to sing. So a little change in weather there, but it's still very still. It's still a reminder that this isn't quite a normal inauguration, but they tried to adhere to some of the same traditions as we've seen before. One of them I don't think we've talked about yet is having the poet recite a poem. And she is a 22-year-old poet, so she is the youngest who has ever recited a poem at an inauguration. And I think it shows that the Biden-Harris team want to show that they have the youth in mind. We know that that is one of President Biden's initiatives in the next few weeks, is to make sure that student loan extension forbearance will continue on as it has been for the last few months during COVID, where many people have not been able to make those payments. So I think that was having that poet, a young poet, do that recitation is sort of a nod to the future of America, and also that they are thinking of the younger people who did vote for them.
Eugene, Amanda Gorman's poem was just stunning. It was a beautiful moment. I'd love to hear you, Eugene, talk more about everything else surrounding this day, from poems to prayers to the rest of the content of this inaugural program.
It was an amazing poem, and I was reading how she continued with it after the Capitol riots. And to Rhonda's point, we've never had such a young person represented at the inauguration in this manner in terms of delivering such words that are going to have a huge impact on history. And I'm further reminded of just how many barriers have been broken with this administration and this moment. I mean, to degrees that many of us forget, we obviously think about the history that Kamala Harris brings to the table with her being sworn in. But a friend of mine who is a Jewish man made a meme that said, to all the nice Jewish boys out there, maybe one day you too could be second president. And you forget there's just so many different groups just being affected by representation here, all the way from Sonia Sotomayor to Dr. Joe Biden being the first full-time working first lady. And this is what Joe Biden campaigned on, promising many Americans that have never seen people who look like them or believe like them or speak like them or come from their worlds represented in Washington, D.C. in the decision-making process involving policy that affects us all. And so I think there's going to be quite a bit pressure on this administration and expectation that this is not just symbolic, but that it actually manifests in a different lived experience in America for many people who feel like their realities have not been considered and including in the policy-making process.
Eugene Scott, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. James, let's go to you for more on the rest of the majesty of this afternoon, from Amanda Gorman's poem to the prayer. It was just touching even to hear Senator Blunt talk about Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace, and how it reminded Senator Blunt of hearing President Obama sing Amazing Grace as he was mourning those murdered in the Charleston Emmanuel AME shooting.
I actually have been struck by the same thing. Roy Blunt ad-libbed well twice. He also, when there were a little bit of snow flurries, he talked about how it was, Amy Klobuchar had ordered it up, who was his partner in organizing the inaugural Minnesotan. Normally, Libby, they would have a big lunch right now. All the members of Congress squeeze in to the rotunda. It's turned into basically a big dining room. And that famously is where Ted Kennedy had a seizure and fell over in 2009 when Obama was having his lunch, and it turned out to be brain cancer, and he would die a few months later. They aren't able to have the lunch today, which is one of the reasons why I think you saw so much socializing on the platform right after. And I think the smallness of the crowd relatively, even on the stage, the social distancing we saw meant that it did feel more intimate for the people who were up there, and it did feel like they were part of something special, part of this American pageant. And Rhonda and Eugene were talking about the Amanda Gorman poem, which in some ways stole the show. And I thought what she said was really good about rebuilding, reconciling, and recovering. But also, she said, a nation isn't broken, but simply unfinished. A nation isn't broken, but simply unfinished. And I thought that was really a good phrase to sum up this feeling of everyone who's standing up there. In some ways, the theme of Biden's speech, which is that our story is still being written. We look at this building, which was 2 weeks ago at this very hour, breached by insurrectionists for the first time since the British had attacked it in 1814 and seized control of the building. And there's obviously all this history in this place, but our story is still being written. Our American story is unfinished. We'd never had a president like Donald Trump before, and we've never, in some ways, had a president quite like Biden before, who's been in politics for half a century before he takes the office. Our oldest president, we haven't mentioned that. But these are characters that join this pantheon of American leaders, and that story is unfinished, and Joe Biden is now part of that story.
James, let's go back to Lee Powell now, our colleague who's been at the Capitol all day. So, Lee, you've really been able to witness history in a unique way today, but especially with this sparse crowd of attendance. So it's been great to hear your personal perspective there. But you've been following Joe Biden for a long time and reporting on the campaign for a long time. And I remember you did a profile of now President Biden back when he was a candidate. What did you learn about what drives Joe Biden?
Well, that's right, Libby. In 2019, during the primary season, kind of at the head of the primary season, I did go to Delaware and spend some time there talking with people who knew Joe Biden, who know Joe Biden. And of course, it's hard to escape Joe Biden's presence in Delaware. If you arrive by train, by Amtrak, you arrive at the Joe Biden station there in downtown Wilmington. It's hard to fathom now, as James mentioned, Joe Biden is the oldest president to be inaugurated, to take office at 78. But when he was elected to the Senate in 1972, he was 29 during the campaign and had just turned 30 in time to actually officially take office. So he was kind of the rock star, if you will, of that day, of that early 70s period. You think about kind of current stars, so to speak, in the political realm now. You think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or maybe Beto O'Rourke. I mean, Joe Biden was kind of that person back in that time. Asked to speak, go to fundraisers, kind of really raised his national profile very quickly. I talked to Joe Biden's sister Valerie Biden Owens, about her brother and what drives Joe. And here's some of what she had to tell me.
The cardinal sin in our house, growing up and it was not a rule on a refrigerator. It was the way my parents raised us, and we lived, was the abuse of power. Joe, my father hated bullies. Joe hated bullies, and when you see something which needed fixing, and we're being bullied by not just physical bullying, but economic bullying and social bullying. Joe just was driven to step up to the plate and to, do something, not as the fearless leader who's going to annoy, and make everything in the world okay. But what I saw him do was give other people courage and give other people hope. And that's the biggest thing about him. He gives you hope. It's like, God, yeah, we can do this.
And in 1972, he did do it, beating a longtime incumbent senator, an improbable campaign, a shocking victory. Also, when I was in Delaware, I talked to Joe Biden's longtime advisor, Ted Kaufman, who in fact replaced him in the Senate when Joe Biden became vice president. He said that victory back in 1972, that first win, made him believe that nothing is impossible again. That's what Ted Kaufman told me. It was so shocking. It could have never, ever happened. But in fact, it did. It did. And Libby, it started this path for Joe Biden almost 50 years later now, ascending to the Senate, to the vice presidency.